G'day guys, Socket here. In the last episode we had a quick look at REW and where you can download the software from, and in this episode we're going to do a walkthrough looking at all the tools and buttons so you can familiarise yourself with the tool before we actually start using it. So first thing we're going to do is just open up REW. Now I'm using version 5.31.3, which is current as of March 2025. If you're using a newer version, there may be slight differences to the way it looks, but the majority of this video should still be relevant. Okay, so when you first open REW, you'll get this white screen, a bit of a welcome to REW message. If you don't want to see this text every time you open up REW, then click here on this text box and that will sort of get rid of that for you. And this is really the opening screen. Sometimes you'll get a pop-up saying something like, oh, your mic's not plugged in, or stuff like that, or you haven't calibrated your microphone or something. Just ignore those. They will disappear once you have everything set up and everything sort of calibrated, which we'll look at in a couple of episodes from now. But while we're here, let's have a quick look around this screen. Okay, so starting at the upper left, we have a series of pull downs, and then below that we have a series of icons which are mainly used for opening and closing files. In the center of the screen we have a bunch of icons which relate to different tools. So for example, the levels meter and the oscilloscope, things like that. On the upper right we have the preferences icon. This is where you can click and get into the different tabs to configure the REW software. And then down the bottom we have a little information window. So at this point we're 16-bit at 48 kilohertz, right? And stuff like that. You'll also notice that there's a bunch of icons that are grayed out, and that's because there's no information or measurements in REW at the moment. So what we'll do is we're going to load up a file and then look at each of these buttons and pull downs in detail. Okay, so if you have some measurements, you can either click on open and navigate to where your file is saved, or a quicker way of doing it is to click on file and you'll see the last 3 or 4 files that you're working on, and so you can click on one of those and open them up, which will activate all the buttons. Or if we can't do that and you're starting with REW for the first time and just following along, another way to take a measurement is to just click on the RTA button here. Click on the start stop button to start the measurement. Talk into your microphone, so blah 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 blah. Stop the measurement and click current, and voila, there we have a frequency response of me saying blah blah blah. So if you've got some measures, feel free to use those. If not, this will give us enough to light up all the icons and let us continue with the walkthrough. Right, with everything lit up, we'll start once again up in the upper left. So the first pull down is file, and like most programs, this allows you to open and save your measurements, and as we already pointed out, your last few items that you were working on are listed here, and you can exit the program, all that usual stuff. These things in the middle are for kind of advanced features. So for example, you can open and save EQ filters into the program if you're working on something and want to apply some EQ filters that you've got saved away. That's where you do that stuff here. You can also import various measures or export various measures. You can get rid of all the measures, or just get rid of one measure that you've got here. So all of that stuff is under file. The next pull down is your tool list. So all the different tools that are available in REW are here, like the signal generator. If I click on that, the signal generator will come up. We'll have a look at that a bit later. Or you could click on the icon over here, so you can get to these tools either via these icons or via this pull down. The next box is preferences. So if you click on the preference, it'll bring up the preference window with all the tabs. Once again, that is the same as this icon in the upper right, takes you to exactly the same place. And you can set your different window sizes, your resolution of your windows, and load or save your different preferences. So if for some reason you might have REW set up for doing a specific type of measurement using specific type of equipment, and you might have two sets of measurement equipment, so you can save your preferences to file and load that up, so on and so forth. So that's what this pull down is for. The next one is your graph pull down. So this bar here is basically all your different graph types. We'll have a look at that in a moment, but a couple of interesting ones here. So for example, fit graph to data. So if, for example, I have this all wound in for some reason, I can click on fit graph to data and it will give us the best fit for the X and Y axis for the data that's available. Particularly helpful when you're looking at something like impulse responses and you're sort of struggling to find where it is on the screen. The other one that you'll use a fair bit is smoothing. So at the moment when you do raw measurements, unless you set your preferences up so it is at a particular smoothing level, you will be smoothing at, you will have about 148 smoothing, right? Or 148 resolution. You generally want to be working in 1/6 smoothing. You can see it's a lot less detailed. This is just crazy to try to work with. Generally 1/6 is fine, even 1/3 is fine. If you go below that, it's not so good. But a lot of people try to work in 124 or 128, and it's totally unnecessary, and you just tend to use a bunch more EQ filters when you're working at these higher resolutions. But that's the graph stuff. You can actually turn the smoothing off and return back to the raw measure. This next button is super helpful. This is the help icon, pull down. So for example, here we are on the SPL and phase graph, and if I click on show help on item and I click there, it will give me a whole bunch of information about the thing I actually clicked on, right? Super helpful. You can go into show help and search a term such as impulse. Okay, just putting in a random term, and it'll give you everything about REW. In fact, you don't have to watch these videos. You can literally just read the help menu, and it'll teach you everything about the tool. It's probably one of the most detailed help menus I have come across with any software, but super helpful resource. Usual things such as check for updates and about REW, what version you're running, and all that usual stuff. Okay, the next two pull downs are a donate buttons if you want to make a contribution to John for the software, or if you want to buy an upgrade so that you can use, I think this is to use multiple mics so that REW can measure 7 or 8 channels at once or something. But yeah, look, I'm not 100% sure what that is, but something like that. So that's all the pull downs in the upper left. Okay, so next the icons underneath the pull downs. The first one is open, which allows you to browse and select and open a set of measurements. Save all does what it says, so you can simply save a file or set of measurements as a MDAT file. So we'll save that. And then if you want to get rid of all the measurements and go back to your home screen, you click remove all, and of course everything is removed from the tool. And you can reinstate it by clicking on open, and there we go. The measurement or the file that you were working on is back. This blue info icon down the end here simply gives you information about the selected file. So if I click on that, it will tell me all the information about the data range and the timing offset and anything I'd really want to know about that measurement. It's useful, for example, you might be working on a bunch of things. Oh gosh, what was the delay that I added to that particular speaker? Well, often clicking on the info button will give you that answer. Right, the last button up here in the upper left is the measure button. Now I always think it should be over here with the other tool icons, but for whatever reason they put it up here in the upper left. But basically it's a tool which allows you to generate some measurement signals, or take, for example, impulse response measures. I won't go into detail about this window just yet because we'll cover that when we get into taking measures, but quite quickly what you're able to do is set up the various parameters here. For example, we're doing a sweep now. You would click start and the REW would generate a sweep. You can see that happening here, and you would measure your speaker and get a measurement, right, or an impulse response, or whatever that you're trying to measure. So that's now appeared in purple. And so that's what this measure icon is used for. Okay, moving over to the center of the screen, we have a series of tool icons. Now, some of these are more useful to car audio enthusiasts, and some are not. So remembering that REW was originally designed for home audio, and so we have a couple of tools here that aren't really of that much use to us as car audio guys. So the first one is the room simulator. This is good for home audio guys. Certainly because of our cabins and the way they operate, having a room simulator where you can reposition your speakers doesn't really work for us, so you can pretty much ignore that particular tool. Also, there's a tool here called IR Windows. It's a little advanced for our needs. It's about when you're doing impulse responses, being able to sort of filter out part of the response, and so this tool allows you to make a bunch of settings to produce a window around your impulse response measure. So we might touch on that when we're doing impulse responses, but once again, a pretty advanced feature, so probably won't use that too much. The other tools that we have available is the sound pressure level meter. So it's a decibel reading meter, useful for when we're calibrating microphones. The next one is a signal generator. So this allows you to, this is a tool within REW that allows you to, for example, either play different signals such as random pink noise or periodic pink noise or tone. So you could set, for example, a 1200 hertz tone and play that, or set up sweeps and things like that. Or if you don't want REW to play them, then you can export them or save them to a file, transfer them to your phone or to your digital player or whatever. So a very handy tool. The one that we will probably use the most will be our pink noises, but that's a tool that is available in REW. The next one is an oscilloscope. So blah blah blah, oscilloscope seems to be working. We will use this tool when we're looking at time alignment, so that's there, an oscilloscope. You have a levels meter is the next tool along. this allows you to look at your output, input, and reference levels just to make sure they're all working and you know, relatively the same as where you'd like to have them. So that's your levels meter. And then the other tools that we have here, overlays, RTA and EQ, are the ones that we're probably going to use the most as car audio guys. So let's have a look at those in a little more detail. Alright, so one we will certainly use a lot, and we've already quickly looked at, is the real-time analyzer. So this is basically your measurement tool. So we'll have our speaker, either in a fixed position or using it as a moving mic to measure a particular speaker or pair of speakers. And so we're going to use this to measure a response. So for example, we'll start the measurement, the speaker response will show up here. There will be a countdown timer which will be down here in the corner, and when we're finished taking our measure and the signal has settled down, we'll hit stop, and then we'll hit this button here called current, which will save the measurement, and then we can close this window. And as you can see, that measurement that we just took is here now in this bluey color. Okay, so that's RTA is our measurement button, and then the other button that we'll use a lot is our EQ button. So the EQ button works for whichever measurement that you've selected. Now the selected measurement is the one that is in white. All the other measurements will be grayed out. So let's pretend that we're going to EQ this crazy green signal. Okay, and that is a speaker. So we would click on our EQ button. Here we can see the measurements. And let's pretend we're going to EQ this part of the signal here, or this is our mid-range driver or something. So without getting into a lot of detail with it at the moment, we'd want a level about, I don't know, let's call it 67. So we'll plug that in there. And these are the controls we're able to, we want a speaker driver. And these are the controls where we can set the curve of the house curve. So for example, let's say our cutoff is going to be 200, and we want that to be a Linkwitz-Riley 24 dB slope, and the other one's going to be 2000 or something. Same thing, we want a Linkwitz-Riley 24 dB slope. So there's our house curve, and we're going to EQ that speaker now. I mean, just for illustrative purposes. So this EQ button is, once again, that's where we do all our speaker EQ work. So that pretty much takes care of all the tool icons. So we'll now move down to the this bar here, which is basically all the different graphs that you can display within REW. So to do this, it's probably easy to look at some real measures. So I'm just going to get rid of, I'm just going to open up and get some measurements pulled in. We'll get rid of some of the crazy measures that we had. And so here is a bunch of speaker responses that I did back sometime last year. So we'll use this as just an example to show how these work. So starting from left to right, once again, there are some of these buttons which are useful to us as car audio guys, and some that are not necessarily that useful. So the first button is a SPL and phase. So what this is basically your frequency response on the top and the phase response on the bottom. So you can move these up and down with the right and left sliders. You can change the range using these little plus and minus icons. I should not the range of scale, sorry, like this. Okay. So let's say that we've got this thing looking crazy like this, there's a couple of quick buttons up here that apply to all of these graphs. So the first one, and I'll just show you these quickly, is the scroll bar. So you can hide the scroll bars if you really want them out of the way. You can change from a logarithmic to linear scale. Generally we're going to be working in logarithmic. And this button here allows you to set the minimum maximums of the axis, but what's really useful here is fit to data. So I can click that and it will automatically adjust all the scales to fit the data that I'm looking at neatly onto the screen, right, like this. So that's a really handy feature, this limits button here. And then we have these other two buttons here, which are graph dependent. So the content will change depending on the graph that you have selected. So there's an action button here which allows us to, for example, unwrap the phase. Okay, so that's now gone way down there, and we'll talk about that when we're looking at phase in another episode, or wrap that phase up, or put a estimated IR delay in here to clean up this phase graph. Okay, and once again we'll cover that in other episodes, but just to show you that these buttons allow you to do different actions on a graph. Or this control button over here, once again, is graph dependent, where you can show a phase 0 line, for argument's sake, right? So that's 0 phase. Once again, we're probably getting a little more detail for a quick walkthrough, but just pointing out that you can select your graphs here, and you have control buttons that you can control the content of the graphs over here on the right hand side. So this is SPL and phase when you want to look at the frequency response and the phase on the same page. The next screen is, I should mention that you can only look at one measurement at a time on this screen. If you want to look at more than one measures, you need to use this button up here called overlays, and when you do that, you can select whichever measurements that you want to compare. That's what the overlay button is, but we'll look at that in more detail in another video as well. Okay, so the next button along is the one that we'll probably use the most, and that's called the All SPL. So it displays all measures, and you can see them numbered here, 1, 2, 3, all the way down. The one that we have selected is in white, the others are all greyed out. And you can see down here we have 1, 2, 3 corresponding to the measures all the way through to measurement 14, which is the last one. And they're all selected and displayed on the screen at once. If you can either individually click them to get rid of them or turn them on, or you can right click and either toggle them all on and off, and then I want to select measurement 9 and measurement 2. You can just display them as you see fit. So normally what we would do is go, well, I want 1 and 3, sorry, I want measurement 2 and 3 because they're my tweeters. I want to see how they compare, and then I want to look at my mids and see what the frequency response are for my mids. Okay, or I want to look at them all together, so I want to select all of them and look at them all together. So when you right click down here in the information window, you can make a bunch of changes. So this All SPL is where you'll basically spend a lot of time looking at the individual frequency responses for your graphs. So for example, at the moment I have my right tweeter with a 3000 Hertz crossover. Now that is at, as you can see here, 148 resolution. Usually I want to work at 6 resolution, so I click on graph and I can click on 1/6. Sorry. And 1/6. Oh, sorry, I've got the that only applies to the measurement I've got selected. So if I want 9, I need to do this and go 1/6. Anyway, so we'll get into into this when we're looking at doing the RTA work. Now, the next few measurements along are of less interest to us. They're distortion, impulse, which we will use when we do time alignment. So yeah, we do use that, and this is a typical impulse response. They have the filtered IR, which we touched on before. We have group delay. We have I'm not sure, this is to do with decay modes and things. So and clarity, vocal versus music clarity, decay, waterfalls, spectrograms. Many of these types of graphs are more useful to the home audio guys. And of course, the last one here is captured. So what this is it will display the last sweep measurement that you've captured, and it's replaced every time you do another measurement. So it's generally, what was having a particular problem, you can go to captured and see what was the last sweep measurement that you did. So in terms of graphs, the ones that we're going to use the most are phase, the phase graph, the frequency response graph, and the impulse charts. They're the three that we're probably going to use the most. The rest are, as I said, more useful to the home audio guys. Right, the last thing we're going to look at is the preferences menu. So what I'll do is just get rid of all of these measures so they're out of the way. So you can access the preferences menu and bring up a series of tabs. And this is where you can configure the REW tool to your own personal liking. And there are 6 tabs. The first tab is your sound card settings or sound settings. So this is where if you were setting up a loopback analog measurement system so you could do impulse response measures and things, this is where you would put in your set up your inputs and outputs, and calibrate your sound card and check your levels and a bunch of stuff like that. If you're using a USB mic, you do not need to worry about this first tab. It's really only when you're using feedback loops and analog microphones and things like that. So it's a little bit more advanced. We will touch on that when we're looking at measures. The second tab is your calibration file. So if you're using a USB mic and it has a calibration file, this is where you would load the calibration file in, and REW would take that calibration into account when it's doing the measurements. What I'll also point out while we're here is this help menu is also spelt out underneath each of these tabs, so it tells you all about the calibration files. And so if you need any more technical information about any of these settings, it's generally found down here in this little help window. The next section is comms, so it's all to do with MIDI ports and things. Not really applicable to us, I don't think. And then there's the analysis window. So this is, you can set up for your impulse windows, rectangular or Hahn, Blackman, all pretty advanced features. When we come to doing impulse responses and stuff, I'll go through all of these settings and make sure that we've got the optimum settings for the type of impulse responses that we're measuring in our car cabins. The next one is the equalizer. So when you're doing your EQ work, instead of having, this is where you can sort of set things up so your defaults are more in line with, I guess, the settings that you'll use a lot. So for example, what's a good example? Setting your speaker driver to be 24 dB slope, right? Instead of, maybe a 6. and so on and so forth. But this is where you can set up your settings for your equalizers. When you click on them, they're already preset. And then the final tab is the view tab. So this is how things are displayed in REW. So for example, don't show the welcome message, right? That you can also turn that on and off there. When you're looking at phase graphs, turning on and off the phase wrap lines. Certainly one of the measures that I like to change is this maximum measure. I think the default's 20 or something like that. So when you're taking measurements, when you hit the cap, it won't store anymore. So I like to bump that up to 100. But yep, so in this area is where you can make changes to how the different graphs look, or turn on and off certain features. So that is a very quick look at the preferences. And kind of brings us to the end of our walkthrough. That's a lot of ground to cover in a pretty short space of time. As I said, we've really only sort of introduced each of the tools and functions that are in REW. As I said, we'll get into far more detail when we actually start using some of these tools when we go to start taking measurements and doing EQ and other car audio tuning work. But hopefully that's giving you a bit of a feel for all the different parts that make up REW, and when we go to start using it, you'll be a little more familiar with what all these things do. So once again, thanks for sticking all the way through to the end, and I'll see you in the next episode.